Raising Dreamers Ministries, and it's called Storytime. And behind me, you can see, I guess you can see it. I don't know, it may be backwards, but it says everybody, every family has a story, but not only every family, but every person has a story. And I thought it'd be exciting to hear some of those stories. And so today I have invited my precious daughter-in-law to come on and talk to us about a great adventure that she and her family and all of us walked through with our grandson Sam. And I'm going to ask Beth to share with us what she learned and what she walked through. First of all, I want you to hear this is a story of miracles. And if you see my necklace, that sounds heartbeat, and you'll understand why it says heartbeat. I don't wear it all the time. And so, but she's going to tell us all about our precious Sam. And this is Beth Erwin. And so, Beth, can you tell us about how you found out what we're fixing to find out, which is going to be mind-boggling when the people find out what the diagnosis was for Sam? But how did you find that out?
Sure. Thanks so much for having me on. It means a lot. This story for our whole family has been
Mm.
an adventure, and it's been hard, but it's also been good. So, but yeah, I'm Beth Erwin. I am Sheila's daughter-in-law. I'm married to John Erwin, and our son Sam is our third born. We have 4 children, and when he was 3, he it's kind of a wild story. He was laying in the floor, and I took him to the pediatrician's office, and she looked him over, felt like he needed to have a scan of his abdomen. They thought maybe something wasn't quite right there. So I took him to Children's. We went back to the pediatrician's office, and she mentioned that he had 1 kidney. And we had never known that Sam only had 1 kidney. Inside, when I had my ultrasounds, when I was still pregnant with him, he had 2. So something happened to that 1 kidney. Weren't quite sure, but later on we find out, we're pretty sure we know what happened. So from there, we had gone to the kidney doctor, the nephrologist, and he looked him over and felt like he needed an MRI of his brain and spine. Some things were going on with his bladder, thought maybe his kidney didn't look healthy. So we scheduled to have an MRI. Now, in the meantime, it took 2 months for that MRI. And they had also just kind of given us a heads up that because Sam had had speech delays, was late to walk and crawl, and all of those things, he thought maybe Sam could have a brain tumor or muscular dystrophy. Those were some of the things that were thrown out that were really scary. And I kind of had to walk that journey through those 2 months of not knowing what was wrong with Sam, which was probably one of the harder times that I went through personally. My nephew, actually, my oldest brother's son passed away from a brain tumor at the age of 5. And I was really scared. I was really scared we were about to walk that journey with him. And so as far as getting to that MRI, there were things that kept coming up that prevented him from being sedated. He ate a chip in the car seat. So we couldn't go through with that. I had to call them. We had to call it off the next time. He has some airway issues. So when he would get croup, he couldn't breathe. And so that happened the next time. And this was just a really trying time for me personally, because all of the unknowns, I personally have not done well with the unknowns. It's always, Lord, help me through this. It's really hard. And there was a lot of praying, a lot of crying out to the Lord, a lot of seeking help from others to just support me through this time. When I look back, that was a hard time. That spring of 2017 was really hard. So once we got to the MRI, we finally got to get there and we're ready to go. And the anesthesiologist listened to Sam's heart, and we kind of walked through some of Sam's breathing issues and stuff. And she listened to his heart and she said, I'm so sorry, but I can't actually sedate him today. You're going to have to go see a cardiologist. I'm surprised I'm the first one that's ever heard this heart murmur. And she said, because it's pretty loud. Now, mind you, Sam had actually been to the ER many times for croup and had had his checkups and things like that. And he still, um, the heart murmur was missed. So I wasn't worried about his heart. That was not my fears. My fear was still on brain tumor or muscular dystrophy. And so it was just walking through getting to that cardiologist the next week. And when we got there, Sam was able to have his MRI of his brain and spine and a CT scan. I'm sorry, that's actually a week after that. Um, so basically, the cardiologist did an ultrasound of his heart, and I could tell in the room that something wasn't right. He kept wanting Sam to move his head around and kind of move around. And we sat there for so long, and I'm like, oh, something's not right. So he said, I need a CT scan and an MRI. We'll have the MRI at the same time, ASAP. So they did the MRI and the CT scan, and Sam's cardiologist wanted to see us right away, directly after. And as soon as we got to the cardiologist, he said, Sam has an interrupted aortic arch type B, and this is usually associated with DeGeorge syndrome. So a genetic disorder commonly known as DeGeorge, but also 22q11.2 deletion syndrome. So when we were at the cardiologist, we realized at that point we may actually have some answers to all of the things that have been going on with Sam. But the most amazing thing was that the cardiologist took a step back and looked at us and said, I really don't know how your kid is alive. And I don't know how Sam is alive. We have never found an interrupted aortic arch in a 3-year-old. And we fix babies' hearts with this heart condition the first week of life, or they don't make it. So that was a moment for me of going, oh my goodness, I've watched a miracle live for 3 years and didn't even know it. Sam lived by collateral vessels, and he was a pure miracle that he lived for 3 years. And in some ways it was really beautiful because we got answers to the issues that were going on. We got to see a miracle live, but then there was also this sick feeling of knowing he needed his heart fixed. And so we kind of had that discussion of when he needs his heart fixed and what that looks like and the risks and what if we don't have his heart fixed and all of those things. So I'm sure Sheila probably has some questions.
I was going to say, Beth, would you tell them when you say disrupted, you really mean it was not connected to his heart? His descending aorta was not connected to his heart, correct?
That is correct. That means that the main artery in your heart that supplies blood to your arms and legs and the lower portion of your body was disconnected. So children with a coarctation of the aorta, where the aorta is just small in one area, can lose their life from lack of blood flow. Sam had a whole centimeter gap. It never actually was, it never grew together. So that blood went from his ascending aorta to his brain and then circled around and came down through collateral vessels. And so it is a catastrophic heart defect if it is not fixed. Absolutely.
Absolutely. I remember the day that you called me and told me that. So people were asking me, how did you respond? And I kept walking around the room just saying, oh, Father, you are an awesome God. How on earth is Sam alive? And not only was he alive, he was healthy and doing well and thriving, except for those other little things that we kind of had questions about. And his daddy didn't walk till later too, so I didn't think that much about the walking issue things. But I remember just walking around and praising God all day long after you told me about what, of course, then the realization of what was going to actually have to be done. Tell the ladies kind of, how did you deal with this as a mom, emotionally and spiritually?
Yeah, so I think it kind of was in stages for me. There was the beginning stages where we didn't know what was wrong, the unknown, and that was a lot of laying my face at the feet of Jesus and praying and asking Him to comfort me, to be there when I couldn't even get my thoughts together, and to trust Him and to not fear, even though I felt like fear was overcoming me. It was a constant giving back, releasing, working through it. And then I also, reached out to my brother who had lost his son, and reaching out to him and just saying, "Hey, I need help. I'm in a really bad place. I need encouragement. I need the truth." And so for him to be able to pray over me, to be able to understand in some ways the struggle of walking through a really difficult thing with a child, and for me to be able to answer some of the questions, like he asked me, um, what is it that you want out of this, Beth? What is it that you need out of this? And of course, my first reaction was, I want to see my son grow up and be healthy and love Jesus. And that was the first thing, that went through my mind. I so desperately wanted that. But then the other thing, he was like, but what do you really want? I said, I need peace. I
Mm.
need peace through this season that's really hard. And so getting more to the heart of what I needed. Um, yes, sure, I want to see Sam grow up and be, a tall, handsome man who loves Jesus and talks to the world about his story. Absolutely. But at the same time, my brother was really trying to pinpoint on me a little bit more. And one of the things that, he reminded me of is that the story that Sam has, I can't write it. It's not my story to write. It's God's story to write. And it was me releasing Sam's story to the Lord, no matter what the outcome was going to be, which is hard to do as a mom. You love your kid, and to remember he's not mine. He's not even mine anyway. He's given to me to steward, but that in the end, the story is the Lord's to write. So walking through that and then coming to the heart, finding out about his heart was, oh wow, this is amazing. I've gotten to see my kid live for 3 years, and what a miracle. And then it was also that, okay, now we've got to do something. So another mountain to trust
Mm.
the Lord with, or valley, as sometimes I would say. And so even in that, emotionally reaching out to others who had walked that same journey, I started reaching out to those who had had children that have had heart defects or a genetic disorder, or syndrome, and allowing them to give me advice and to comfort me through that, but to still continue to walk the truth out before me. Um, and so I would say it came in waves, even when he had his
Mm.
heart fixed and he was doing really well in the hospital. Our first time in the hospital, as we'll go into more later, in a setback we had. I just remembered listening to worship music and looking over at Sam and thinking, I feel so loved. I really felt so loved by the Lord and by others through all of that. And it allowed me to have a different perspective on life across the board. So I really kind of came in there with, as Sam's heart was mended, a lot of my heart was mended in a different way. So yeah.
Now that's kind of neat. One of the things that, as I prayed, and I don't know if I've even ever told you this, but one of the things as I was praying for myself, Hank and I, but also your mom and dad, is that already walked through the loss of a grandchild not too many years earlier, and then after that of praying back to the Lord. And Beth's a lot like me in that fear is my biggest enemy, and I think a lot of women are that way, but I know some that aren't. But fear is my biggest enemy. And as I thought through it and I prayed for Beth, the Lord said to me in my heart, this is for Beth. And I thought, okay, Lord, you're going to do a mighty work in her as well as in our precious grandson. Well, tell us about the day of surgery. It finally arrives. We're we stayed home with all the other children. They came over to our house and we stayed, and they were asking all kinds of questions that made it really a tough day to answer some of the tougher questions they were asking. For me, and for me, as a grandmother, the hardest moment was when you and John were calling back and forth or texting back and forth with us, and you said he's on the bypass machine, and I thought, oh God, my grandson's heart's not beating. Um, and that was one of the hardest parts for me. But as a mom, as you're walking toward that day, and you get there, and here we are, they're going to be taking your son back into surgery, and they're going to stop his heart and work on it, and he's going to go on a bypass machine. What was that like for you as a mom?
Hopefully the dogs don't bark because they're enjoying seeing someone outside. um, as far as for me, that day leading up to it, I remembered the night before praying over Sam, laying next to him, thinking, is this the last night I'm going to spend with him? Is this the last night I'm going to be able to just cuddle with him? And so the next day we get up there, we have to be there really early in the morning. We're one of the first cases. And I remembered thinking, I have to walk through this. This is not something I can get around. This is not something I can run from. And to put my head down and just to say, okay, Lord, John and I have chosen to do this together. This is what needs to happen, talking with his team of people. And I remembered sitting there in the room, and I'll share a little side story real quick, because this is really neat. One of the cardiologists walked by, and we're in the window bay. It was not Sam's cardiologist. It's a different cardiologist. And Sam's heart surgeon, because they have two, they have a surgeon and a cardiologist. His heart surgeon looked at the other cardiologist and said, look, there's our interrupted aortic arch for the day. And I remember the doctor saying, with his coffee in his hand, you mean, he's had surgery before, right? And Sam's surgeon said, no, this is his first surgery. And the cardiologist's face you could just see his face and his eyes. And it was like a deer in the headlights. He just kept looking at Sam like, how is that kid alive in that room right now? And that was really neat to see. Like, I was so glad I got to witness that. But so leading up to those moments of us praying for Sam and then knowing, hey, it's time to go, it's go time. And the nurse drapes him, over his shoulder and walks him back to the OR. And I remember Sam's face looking at me as he was walking to the OR. Hopefully I won't get choked up here. And I remembered thinking, Lord, if this is the last time that I see him and you take him home, if you choose to take him home, I'm still going to love you, and I'm still going to follow you, and I'm still going to shout from the rooftops that you are God, and that you still care, and that you are still good. And I remembered having to just release him at that point, that I had no control, really had no control. It was the Lord, the surgeon, and his team that was going to work on Sam's heart. And yes, the stopping of his heart, thinking, what if it never beats again? And so that whole process of sitting in the room and waiting on all the information and how he was doing was definitely a constant release and a constant just trust and praying that he would come through. I did have two ladies there with me that had children that had been through open heart. So just there, if we wanted to talk, we wanted to sit, if we wanted to pray, they brought us some snacks. I mean, they were there for us for whatever we needed. And that was a nice, it was just a nice knowing that I was not alone, that I wasn't alone, that they had walked this journey before, and that they knew what it was like. And so, the neat thing is now I love to talk to other heart moms now and what they've been through, and be able to encourage them through their whole journey, because I've walked through it. And I think that's the beautiful thing that the Lord gives us, is when we walk a journey, of something that's hard, our story, if we can identify, what that's like with someone else, we're all human and we need each other. God put us on this
Mm.
earth for relationships and we need each other. And I have a hard time sometimes with opening up and allowing myself to need others, but it's important that we do that when we're walking through something really hard, uh, because we can't do it alone. So yeah, I mean, having others with us was amazing.
Yeah, and Beth mentioned earlier there was a setback. Sam did really great with the surgery, and they went home actually earlier than they had hoped or thought, and they got home. Um, and tell everybody what happened. I think this was probably harder, one of the harder things you had to walk through, because it looked so great. He's doing terrific. Everybody was really amazed at how well he was doing, and then we had a setback.
Yeah, so we got to go home 3 days after his surgery, which was pretty amazing. And once we got home, seemed like everything was going great. Of course, I was a nervous wreck because he has this, incision right here that's trying to heal up. And of course, there were some things we had to watch for once he was home. But we had 2 nights at home. And that second night, we woke up the next morning and Sam happened to be laying next to me and John felt of his arm and he said, um, Sam's arm's cold. And we knew at that point, it was an immediate phone call to the cardiologist and they wanted to see him right away. So we rushed him back up to Children's. And sadly, we went straight back up to CVICU and they couldn't figure out if his arm had a clot in it, or if it was because they had sacrificed his bilateral subclavian arteries. So his arteries from his arms to his heart are no longer connected. And they had to sacrifice them because it was holding down his aorta. And so by taking the um, arteries from his heart off to his arms were only bilaterals at that point. However, he pretty much only lived bilaterals before in his arms, so we couldn't quite figure out what was going on. We stayed there another 8 days, and that they had him on blood thinners. We had vascular surgeons looking at him. They didn't know if they needed to do bypass. We were constantly making sure his arm was not going all the way cold
Mm.
because, an arm that goes cold, really cold and loses all oxygen does not survive for long. It would have been a really catastrophic thing for his arm. So that was really rough. He no longer had a central line for blood draws. They had to draw from his feet because his arm had one IV in it and the other arm was cold. So as a mom, I remember thinking, I don't think I can sit here anymore. I had to run out of the room at one point and another nurse kind of helped me calm down. It was rough.
Mm.
Those blood draws were really tough. But as far as that whole process goes, we got to the end of that stay and we were ready to go home on some blood thinner shots that I was going to have to give Sam for a couple of months. Wasn't looking forward to that, but I was like, whatever, I'm going to do it for my kid. We get to go home. And they did an ultrasound of his heart and they realized that he had fluid around his heart. He had an effusion around his heart in the heart pocket. And there was a significant amount of fluid. And they didn't know if that was blood or if it was fluid, just normal fluid. And at that point, they said, we got to take him off the thinners. The arm is not as important as the heart. And I just remember that moment of thinking, I really hope and pray his arm makes it because his heart's more important. And so the next day they scanned his heart, no more extra fluid. We were off blood thinners and they said, we're going to send you on home. And at that point, I was like, wow, okay, we're going home without blood thinners. We pray and hope his arm warms up. And he was on a lot of aspirin and Lovenox which are some of the medications that they get to make that effusion go down. So we went home and prayed and trusted the Lord with it. And within 2 weeks, his arm was warm and didn't need bypass, but it was a waiting game. It was definitely one of those touch and go waiting to see if his arm would make it. So I'd say that that was definitely one of the harder hospital stays.
Yeah, I'm sure. I'm sure. Well, I'd like for you to share with us a couple of things in closing about this story. It's an amazing story. It's our story. I love to watch people when they ask me. They'll ask me about what this is. And Beth had these made. She's got one on as well. It's Sam's heartbeat, and people ask me, so I have so many opportunities to share the miracle that God did with my grandson, and so that's exciting. But my question is for you: two things. One, we talked a lot about you and how you walked through it. What did it do for you and John as a couple? That's the first question. What did y'all learn as a couple as y'all walked through this together? And then the other thing is, if I have a friend, or you have a friend, anybody out there that's listening to this, if you've got a friend that a child is walking, maybe not through a heart surgery, but through a difficulty with a child, maybe a sick child, or whatever, a chronically ill child, I think is really difficult as well. Any of those things, how can we encourage them? In other words, what really helped you when others came alongside, and how can you encourage the women that are listening, if they have other women in their lives that need to be encouraged, or maybe they need to be encouraged as well? But first of all, what did you and John learn as a couple? And then close for us, and then I'll close this out. But tell us how we can help others.
Sure. So one of the things that I said, when we were walking through it is like things like this can either, break you into pieces or can mend broken pieces. So throughout mine and John's journey, there was a lot of us learning how to give each other the room to deal with our own emotions and then be there for each other however we were walking through it. But knowing that the Lord really can mend some broken pieces. One of my favorite Bible verses is, that the Lord came to heal the brokenhearted and bind up their wounds. Psalms 147:3. And that's one of my favorite Bible verses now, because there's something tangible for me in that, knowing that, yes, Sam needed a surgeon to heal his heart. We need the great physician to heal our hearts, because we all are born with a broken heart. And so that's one of my favorite things there. But I think throughout the whole thing for John and I is we walked it out. We put our heads down and we trusted the Lord through it. And we gave each other the space to walk through, whatever feelings we had, and then reached out to those around us. So, and I'll lead with that. If someone else is going through, whatever it is, whether it's a child that has, like my nephew, cancer, or my other nephew, my youngest brother just lost a son a year ago in March to cerebral palsy. One of the things that helped me, and I think for them too, but I can't speak for them, was other people saying, how can I help you? How can I love on you? How can I be there for you? What do you need? I love one of the things that my sister-in-law, Mandy, always says to me whenever I'm like in a struggling moment. Hey, how can I help you? And what do you need? And somehow her being able to ask allows me to evaluate where I'm actually at. And then for me to speak up and say, hey, I really just need prayer, or I really need encouragement, or I really need the truth. And so to be able to do that. And then for others, one of the things that I love to do is to find needs, that can be met from those that are hurting. So just doing something small. There were so many people that gave us gift cards to someplace to eat, or a note, just a note. I mean, all of Sherwood, church sent us this packet of notes saying how they were praying for us. And I still have them all. And it means a lot when you know that there's like a lot of people around you when you're struggling. But being able to also say, hey, we have this situation. Will you help? Will you pray for us? Will you be there? And so those are the ways that I think can be really helpful for sure. And then just saying, hey, I'm here. I hear you. Do you need a hug? Sometimes those are some really big things, that can be really helpful.
Amen. Those are very good things. I really pray that you've heard and Beth's story and our journey as a family, and that you've been encouraged. Maybe you're walking through something, and that to know that God never leaves us nor
Mhm.
forsakes us.
Right.
And as Beth said, to cling to Him and say, God, I will not walk away from you. I will trust you even in this difficulty, in this difficult place. I'll trust you because you are trustworthy. And to remember, too, just even as Beth has said, that He comforts us so that we can comfort others. And so Beth has a platform wherewith to be able to comfort others that are walking through a situation like that. I remember Beth and I going to the hospital long after Sam was better, of a dear friend whose adult son was having heart surgery, and one of the things our church had done for Beth and John was make a care package of snacks and drinks and different things for them to have right there so they didn't have to leave the room. And we did that for them and took that to them. And seeing Beth minister to this mom who was older than her, and her son was really almost Beth's age, but it was having to go through surgery as well. So to remember to allow God to use those things that He's brought us through, that He wants to bring us through, in order to say, God is ever faithful. And He's given you a story, so share it. Thank you, and God bless.